Good evening. I'm Dr. Anthony WHUT, and I currently serve as the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Howard University. It is my honor and my pleasure to welcome you to the Gwendolyn and Colbert King Endowed Chair in Public Policy Lecture Series. And this evening, our esteemed guest is the Honorable Marcia Fudge, the 18th Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development. And I want to first turn things over to Ms. Donna Brazile, our chair in the Gwendolyn and Colbert King chair for this year. Donna, thank you so much for joining us and for gracing us with your presence this evening. Thank you.
3.5 great years here on the campus of Howard University. And I want to thank the provost and, of course, President Frederick for your leadership. Especially now, we know that the students here have been undergoing so much these past few weeks with the threats to them and the campus itself. So thank you once again, Provost. Welcome back to the Spring 2022 King Lecture Series here on the campus of Howard University. The theme this semester is Make the Future Your Own, Building Stronger Together. Our series of programs and lectures bring students, faculty, and guest speakers together in our nation, here at home and abroad. It is my great honor to have as our special guest the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Marcia Fudge. Secretary Fudge is a proud graduate of Ohio State University and Cleveland State University, Cleveland Marshall School of Law. Secretary Fudge is the former mayor of Warrensville, Ohio, where she served 2 terms. And she went on to be a prosecutor in her beloved Cuyahoga County, and she was elevated all the way up, I believe, to the Director of Budget and Finance. And then later, after the tragic death of one of her mentors and good friends, the Honorable Stephanie Tubbs Jones, she ran for Congress, she won the seat, and she represented the 11th Congressional District of Ohio from 2008 to 2021, where she also served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. As a member of Congress, Secretary Fudge served on the Committee on Agriculture and chaired the Subcommittee on Nutrition Oversight and Department Operations. She was also a member of the House Education and Labor Committee and the Committee on House Administration, where she served as chair of the Subcommittee on Elections. Secretary Fudge earned a reputation for tackling tough issues, unique challenges, not only facing her district and her beloved state of Ohio, but also she worked with her congressional delegation and, of course, across the political divides. Finally, Secretary Fudge is the second Black woman to serve as Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Patricia Roberts Harris was the first appointed in 1978 by former President Jimmy Carter. That's right. Madam Secretary, we are so honored to have you here on campus with us during Black History Month. And as you well know, during this period, we celebrate Black excellence, and we celebrate the achievement of so many who have dared to make a difference, and this is a historic campus. So I want to welcome our viewing audiences both in the studio and via the WHUT YouTube page. For those of you viewing online, please send your comments or questions to #KingLectureSeries. We will leave ample time for questions from our students and our special guests. So I just want to get started, Madam Secretary.
All right.
I've known you for a long time.
That's right.
I was so excited that you became Secretary of HUD. And soon after being sworn in, as you well know, your good friend, someone you know very well, Howard University alumni, Vice President Harris, you all met with civil rights leaders. And in that meeting, based on the readout, you discussed some of the most important initiatives. And I want to start by sharing with our students in the audience that you talked about homelessness, and especially those who recently became homeless because of the pandemic.
Right.
I know we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan and the Build Back Better and so many other initiatives, but since we're talking about the pandemic, how have you addressed homelessness? Why is it such a major problem now, not just here in our region, but across the country? And what is the Biden-Harris administration doing to help fight evictions and deal with the chronic conditions of those who are homeless in our society today?
First off, thank you, my friend, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
I think it's important that people realize that homelessness has been a crisis in this country long before the pandemic. And I think the other thing that people need to understand is that of the 580,000 or so people who sleep on our streets every single night, more than 40% of them look like you and me. Mm. We don't understand what this country is doing to its poor. And so there's a confluence of things, Donna, that have created the problem. One, obviously, is that wages have not kept up. Housing is more expensive than it's ever been. We have a supply problem so that there just is not enough low-income and moderate-income housing to take the stress off of the market. And until we get it, we're going to have more and more people on the streets because they can't afford to live anywhere. I was in San Francisco with Mayor Breed a few months back. I'm talking to a gentleman who was living in a shelter. He said, I'm not on the streets because I'm on drugs or because I have mental illness or any of that. He said, I make less than $1,000 a month. There is nowhere in the city that I can live. And that is what we're finding everywhere. We're seeing it with students. The fastest growing group of people on the streets today are senior citizens and families with children. And so that is why we are putting such a big, bright light on it and focusing on it, but it's always been there. It's just like everything else. Poor people are invisible in this country.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned you were in San Francisco, and I read recently where you stated that the median cost of a home, a single-family home, is $1 million, and in Boulder, Colorado, $800,000. I would argue that D.C. is right up there with $500,000, possibly more. When I came to Washington, D.C. as a student, I was able to find a rent control apartment for $285 a month. I know the students are here laughing. $285.
I'm laughing.
Oh yeah, yeah. 200. You can't find 280. You can't live with 4 people, 8 people for $285. So what are we doing, and what is the Biden-Harris administration doing to sort of even the playing field, so everyone has the ability to move into cities like Washington, D.C., leave the campus when they leave Howard University and go find some housing downtown?
Well, there are a number of things that are happening. I'm going to go back first to the homelessness crisis. In the American Rescue Plan, there is $10 billion to address homelessness. $10 billion.
$10 billion.
$5 billion that is going to communities, and a lot of cities are doing things like buying hotels and building new housing to shelter homeless. So there's $10 billion. In addition to that, the president has committed in the Build Back Better plan to build at least 1 million new units of housing. Once we put housing on the market, then we know what's going to happen. But more importantly, he's going to make it easier for people to build it. So low-income housing tax credits are going to be more readily available. We're going to raise the cap. More money into CDBG and home programs, more money into housing trusts to make it so that businesses want to do it, because they don't build it because they don't make money. Yeah. We want to help them make money, and so we're putting the resources in to encourage and to incentivize them to build.
But people don't know what President Biden and the Vice President, some people are saying that they're invisible. They don't know what the CBDG is. Can you break down the CBDG?
It is a block grant that is given actually through HUD to communities of certain sizes to assist them with things that they cannot do themselves. So let's just say that, let's talk about housing. We provide resources to assist them in purchasing property, in getting tracts of land together, in incentivizing people who want to build in their communities, low-income housing. You see it happening all over the country. Right. Birmingham's doing a great job. A lot of cities are doing it. But what it does is it gives them a boost because they can't do it on their own. So it's just our share.
Okay.
That's block grant, and it goes to what are called entitlement cities over 50,000. But we also have those funds going to smaller communities through counties. Low-income housing tax credits are credits that are given so that they can write down part of the cost and they make money, basically. But we are making it easy for them to do the work that we know needs to be done. And if we don't encourage them to do it, then they won't. And then the last thing is, Don, I think that's so important, is we have so many communities where people don't want moderate income or low-income people living in their communities. So we have lots of planning and zoning issues that create another problem because they want you to buy acre lot to build a house, or they want you to use a certain kind of building material or a certain size, or all it is a way to keep people out of their communities that they don't want.
I want to ask you another question, because I read so many of your speeches over the last couple of weeks. And by the way, you're very active, not only in traveling across the country, but also speaking to local media. So I was able to read not just your speech a week ago at Harvard, but also some of the activities that you're doing in terms of meeting with Black financial institutions. Why is that so important in providing resources to those financial instruments, those financial institutions, to get money into the neighborhoods and into the community?
Well, I think you said it all. When you deal with, let's just take PPP. We put in place a program to assist businesses that we thought had been harmed by the pandemic. That money went to the biggest businesses and to the biggest banks.
Right.
And so the people who needed it, the mom and pops, the people who only have 3 or 4 or 5 employees, were left out of the process altogether. And the reason they were is because they don't have relationships with the people who got the money. But our community development financial institutions are the closest people to our people. They're the closest to the ground. So they know people in the neighborhoods. They know the store owner. They know the small business owner.
Right.
And so we can get it to them through these kinds of systems, and I think it works very, very well.
Well, you're talking about Industrial Bank, because we're here on Georgia Avenue, and because on Georgia Avenue you see Wells Fargo, you see Bank of America, Chase, but you also see Industrial Bank. Industrial Bank is a minority-owned institution. So finally, because of your leadership, Industrial Banks and many other independents, and back home in Louisiana, Liberty Bank. So I just want to thank you for your leadership. But in terms of closing the racial wealth gap, HUD will partner. I believe you are going to partner with these institutions to address this important issue. How will that unfold? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, homeownership is still the way that most people of color and most people in this country start to build wealth, and everybody knows that. But what we find is that there are so many impediments, especially for people of color, to get into the market. These are the institutions that can do the housing counseling. These are the institutions in their neighborhoods.
Right.
These are the institutions they trust. And so if we put more resources into them, we can get the word out better. I mean, I can't go to every city in America, but there's one of them in every city in America.
Right.
They know the people at the church. They know the people in the neighborhood. And so they can get the word to them in a way that we cannot.
That's right. And they also know the people who just open up a cafe where you can get your coffee right down the street versus going halfway down the city to find one of the big coffee chains. During your lecture series at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, you talked about what the world would look like if we could build a better future for everybody. And I just want to quote, because I want you to expand on this. What kind of nation, this is from the Honorable Marcia Fudge, I didn't say this, but I just wanted you all to know, I have to quote my good friend, the secretary. What kind of nation do we want to live in? And is housing something that we believe that everybody should have? You really laid out a vision of why housing is key to the American dream and also the future of including everybody. You talked about your own childhood, the fact that you grew up and in a stable neighborhood and environment, and how important that was to your upbringing. So I just wanted you to expand on that lecture here at Howard University.
I would say that it is proven that a person's zip code almost can determine their outcomes. That should never happen in the greatest nation in the world. Yes. Everyone should have an opportunity to succeed. But certain zip codes, because their schools are not good, because they're not jobs, because there's not transportation, we have created an environment where we have segregated poverty in this country. And so in order to change that dynamic, we have to create opportunities for people to live in areas of opportunity, places where they can thrive and learn and be a part of a bigger society. But as long as we segregate poverty, we're never going to be a nation where everybody can live in a decent place. House means everything.
Everything.
I don't care who you are. I don't care how little your house is, whether it's in an apartment. If you have no place to call home, there is nothing in your soul that even feels good about who you are. And so housing is, to me, the most important thing next to eating, next to breathing, is to have a safe place, a place where nobody questions who you are, where people support who you are. It is important to succeed.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I remember, again, going back to coming to Washington, D.C., graduating from my college with $150. So I stayed with friends until I got my first paycheck and I found that housing. It took me 10 years to put down money to get my first house, which thankfully it was on Capitol Hill, 8 blocks from where Frederick Douglass called home. And as you can imagine, 20 years later, I had a little bit of wealth and equity. Again, going back.
Work. But we don't build transit lines in neighborhoods that I came from.
No.
You know, you don't put universities in neighborhoods where I came from. You don't build new plants and manufacturing plants and new office buildings in my neighborhood. And so we have to get there to get a job. And we can't get there. And so you have to look at the transportation. You have to look at how you build and where you build and how you can make that all work together. But I also think that at some point we need to take some real ownership in the fact that we have historically and systematically made it difficult for people of color to survive and to thrive in this country. So one of the things that we are focused on, even at the direction of the president, is to look at everything through an equity lens. So let's take how we deal with sustainability. People who had problems with paying their mortgage coming through the pandemic, the first thing we did is obviously we gave them some forbearance. We said, we are not going to foreclose on you. Now that we're coming out of, this is what we're saying to them. Okay, you're in arrears. Let's not only just give you a modification. We're going to extend your mortgage another 10 years. So instead of having a 30-year mortgage, we're going to give you a modification, reduce your interest rate, and reduce your payment because we're going to give you 10 extra years to pay for it. If you are a student, we're saying that student debt is one of the biggest deterrents for Black and brown people to purchase a home. So we have done a recalculation where we pretty much neutralize credit worthy.
Yeah.
Because we know that's a big issue. 45% of all Black people that go for loan have student debt, and it's a problem. And then the third thing.
You said 45%?
45%.
Wow.
And the third thing, we know that we have not done our part as it has related to assisting home buyers, especially people of color. So in the president's 2022 budget, he has requested $100 million for down payment assistance. So we're going to put you in a home with equity. We want you to buy a home and have at least 10% equity in your home.
That's in the fiscal year 2022
budget, correct.
That the president will likely announce right after the State of the Union coming up. $100
million.
I've never heard that much, and I'm a former Hill staffer. When I was a Hill staffer, after looking after the district budget, and of course that also included at times Howard University, because my ex-boss, your good friend Eleanor Holmes Norton, always cared about the funding for Howard University. I would always look at HUD budget. HUD had some of the most interesting items in the budget, and so as you look at that budget, how do you look at it through an equity lens without thinking about communities like here in D.C., like my hometown of New Orleans, like your hometown of Cuyahoga? How do we lift these communities up so that they're sustainable and that there's a path for people for home ownership?
Well, one of the first things that we started doing was talking about giving low-dollar loans. And for those of you who don't understand, it's loans that are under $100,000. But most banks and us didn't do it because we didn't make money on the loan. But if you go into communities like the one I live in right now, you can buy a house for $30,000 or $40,000, but most people don't have the money to renovate the house.
You can buy a house where for $30,000, $40,000?
Girl, am I in Cleveland?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay.
please.
I
don't. Home is Cleveland.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
So,
I'm like DC.
So there are neighborhoods with vacant streets that are just vacant and abandoned. But what the city, some of them really are in good shape. Not obviously they need rehabilitation, but they're structurally sound. We can take people, let them buy these properties, and rehabilitate them. A lot of them are in land banks.
Okay.
Think about it now.
Land banks.
Land banks swoop up all of this land, A lot of it is taken back for things like taxes, all kind of things. And then there, as well as just last month, well, in December, we auctioned off about 1,700 houses that were, delinquent for what, vacant, most of them all. And before, they would let flippers and people buy these houses, right? So this time we said, no, half of these houses, at least half, are going to go to people so they can live in them.
That's good.
So we're starting to try to put back housing in the market that people can't afford, and then we want to help them purchase them and help them rehabilitate them, because that's how you rehabilitate neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods, that's right.
Not one house, neighborhoods.
I love that. So let's talk about gentrification. That's always the elephant in the room, and we know that it is defined as a process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in. And of course, it increased property values, but it also leads, in most cases, to displacement. Many people, I would say, I say many people, I think students and others, we're concerned about gentrification. I mean, neighborhoods that I grew up in, neighborhoods that I live in. I mean, I've seen the change overnight. So what can we do about that issue?
It is a problem. There's no question about it. But it all comes down to something really, really simple. Now, I know people don't like it when I say it, but it's about who you elect. It's your mayors and your city council people, your zoning and planning people. They're the people who make these decisions that allow this to happen.
Right.
So you have to hold them accountable and say, you are not going to come in and take over my community.
Right.
Because what is happening is that people have moved so far out.
Yeah.
It's too far for them now, so they want to come back.
They want to come home.
So they want to come down into the core cities. They want to come into downtown communities and take them over, and we have allowed them to do it.
That's right. That's right. I've been so concerned about that, but I want to address, before we go to questions, because I know some of the students here sent me some of their questions, but I'm not going to read your questions. I'm going to let you actually talk to the secretary. Last week, Black cabinet members at the White House celebrated Black History Month. What was it like to be in a room with, the Secretary of Defense? That's one of my, clearly, I just want to get to meet Lloyd Austin, but you were also in the room with the Vice President and the Domestic Policy Affairs person. You had so many others around the table. What was that like?
So, Donna, I tell you, I take great pride in being able to be in this president's cabinet. I also take great pride in the people I work with.
Yeah.
The people in that room, exceptional. Just care so much about where we are going as a nation, how we treat each other, how we make the wrongs that have gone on for so long right. They all feel the same way. And it's exhilarating, but it's also humbling.
I bet.
It's very, very humbling.
I mean, you're a lawyer, you're a former prosecutor, you've also been on the front lines for civil rights and voting rights all your adult life, and within the next few weeks, you will be in the room, I'm sure, when the president announced his first, his SCOTUS pick, his first pick. And he has promised to put a Black woman. So how do you feel about this moment? Tell us about what this feels like as a lawyer, somebody who went to law school and someone who has practiced law.
I'll tell you, I'm almost afraid of what my reaction is really going to be. It's like when the president
picked...
It's
a preview, so
it's
a preview.
It's like when the president picked Kamala Harris.
Yes.
I'm waiting for it. I'm kind of knowing it's going to happen. But it hit me in a way that I never thought it would.
Yeah.
And I cried with everybody else. Being a lawyer and loving the law, and understanding that it is the law that keeps our democracy from anarchy. To have a person on that bench, on that panel that understands who I am, and understands how important it is to have a voice.
Yes.
For people who have no voice. I don't know how it'll affect me, but I'll probably cry that time too.
Well, I'll be crying with you. I'll be bringing my napkins and Kleenex and everything else I have. Students, get ready. I have two other questions, and that is Build Back Better. We talk about it. Some people think it's dead on arrival. Senator Manchin from the great state of West Virginia said, we're not ready for it. Do you think that program will see the light of day? Will the Democrats decide to carve it up, cherry pick, get some of the health initiative, get some of the housing initiative, get some of the climate, or should we continue to fight for the entire program?
I do believe they will break it up. You know, I mean, you know, I served in Congress long enough to know that there are some things that we just can't give up on. Now, do I believe we should pass it all? Yes. But we are behind every industrialized nation in the world as to how we treat our children, our parents and grandparents.
Yes.
How we deal with climate change, how we provide for people who need help. It is the human infrastructure bill as we describe it. And I don't think that we can give up. And I do think some of it will pass. I don't know how much of it will, but I know that some of it must pass.
I agree with you. All right, we're going to take our first question from a student. Please come up to the microphone, identify yourself. I know many of you. Tell the secretary who you are, where you're from, and please direct your questions to her.
Thank you again for this platform, Ms. Brazile and Secretary, for joining us on this platform. My name is Ryan Penson. I'm a junior political science major, legal communications minor. I'm from upstate New York. My question was, ever since I'm a science major, and ever since I was maybe 15, 16, I always noticed new construction is always luxury housing, and that's been one of the things that's kept a lot of people of color or new, first-time home buyers from keeping a home, because most new construction built in cities, especially I'm from New York, is all luxury apartments and luxury housing. What incentives are in our states or even in our cities and maybe even in your office that are offered to builders and developers that can start building more affordable housing instead of luxury housing?
There are a couple, actually. And a new one is in the Build Back Better bill. It's a neighborhood tax credit that I think will be significant if we can get that passed. But as well as we have what we call Housing Trust Fund, where we put resources in to deal with the lowest income individuals. In the Build Back Better bill, we have put significantly more. We have, as I said, increased our low-income housing tax credits to encourage builders to build moderate and low-income housing because they make money with the credits, and it's not as costly. Then we bear a lot of the cost of doing it. As well, we have put about $5 billion in to address the whole issue of not in my backyard. And so that is a discussion we're having, and New York is a prime example of it. But we can only do so much. We can get the resources to the states, to the cities and the counties, but it is them. It is the states, the cities, and the counties who have to make a commitment to doing it. There's only so much we can do. We provide the resources. We make it easy, we make it profitable, and I think that that's a big step in the right direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next question. Ms. Williams. I make it my duty and responsibility to get to know as many students on campus. They keep me young and active.
You all are fortunate, trust me.
And I love them. Come on, Ms. Williams. Shannon.
Hi, my name is Channing. I'm a junior legal communications major, sociology minor from Dallas, Texas. This issue of housing is just so intersectional, especially to Black and brown communities. You have the minimum wage, you have issues with student debt. How do we, as young activists and young people who hope to follow in your footsteps, you know, other than knocking on our mayor's and councilman's door every day, are there ways that we can go outside of maybe governance to build our own communities up in a manner that doesn't cause gentrification, or that doesn't lead to displacement? Or how can we use concepts like mutual aid to make sure that my neighborhood where I grew up not only has transportation, but has the school and has the access that brings about the equal opportunities that we seek?
The first thing I would suggest to you to do, because I hear your heart and I'm glad about it. I see me in you. The first thing I would say is to put yourself in a position to make policy decisions. Not necessarily political decisions, but policy decisions.
Yep.
And so if you prepare yourself in whatever it is, but you can make policy, you can change things without necessarily having to be an elected official or to knock on their door. Decisions are made based upon people's belief systems and people's desire to make change. That is what activists and policymakers do. Be a policymaker.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Be an advocate and turn your advocacy.
For being here. My name is Nigel Johnson. I'm a senior political science major, economics minor from Port St. Lucie, Florida. And when we talk about housing, being from Florida, climate change is something that's really big for me because, when we're talking about equity in someone's home, if a hurricane comes through and blows off the roof, that equity is gone. So I wanted to know, what considerations does the Biden administration have, and even your office have, when talking about new housing and how climate change affects that?
First, let me say I was an economics minor, too. Climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time. So in the Build Back Better agenda, there is at least the ask is somewhere in the $60 billion number, because what people don't realize is that when we have these storms and floods, etc., it hurts more Black and brown communities than any other community.
Yes.
Additionally, we tend to live in areas that are closer to brownfields and Superfund sites. We're the people who are most affected. So there's that piece of it. The second piece of it is we're talking about building resilient housing. Housing that is resilient to the storms. We know the storms are going to come. It may be something as simple in Louisiana as not allowing them to build anything unless it's at least 2 to 3 feet off the ground. I don't know if it's in every single community, but we are looking at it. But the other thing, too, is we're saying, let's take the housing we have and make it more resilient. So we want to make it more energy efficient. We want to make it stand up to storms. All of those resources are in the Build Back Better agenda.
Yes.
Climate change is going to change the way that all of us think about housing at some point. And when you look at in Indian country, where it is even just worse, even than in our communities, we have to put in the resources because resiliency is going to be the word of the day. If we do not do it, I don't know that we ever become whole as communities that are communities on the waterfront or communities that are in cancer alleys and other places that we know of that are difficult. But we have to address it, and the money will be there to address it if we can get it passed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question. Excuse me.
Hello, thank you both for being here and providing a platform for students to speak. My name is Kylie Burke. I'm a senior honors political science major, psychology minor from the Bay Area of California. And if I'm honest, it's an area of California that becomes less and less familiar every time I travel back home. The concept of gentrification is heavily talked about back home, as well as here in DC. But I'm interested to know from your position in HUD, a lot of the times we hear misinformation being attributed to COVID-19 or national elections. Are there any public perception or misinformation obstacles you face related to gentrification or housing policy where people just might not agree with what the data is showing?
Well, sure, people talk a good game. You can't listen to always what they say. You have to look at what they do. California has probably about 40% of the homeless people in this country because they can't afford to live there. And so when you start to look at communities that at one point were reasonably priced, and you now allow them to come in and even take that housing. So all you do is exacerbate the problem. You already have a homelessness problem. You just make it worse when you start to allow them to come in and take over whole communities and raise the price so high that even those who own their homes can't afford to live in them anymore. And that is what is happening, not just in California, it's happening in a lot of places. But until there is a policy in place, you're not going to stop them. Because one thing about money, money talks. All it takes is for one person to come into one of these neighborhoods, spend $500,000 more for a house than it's worth, or come in and tear one down and build a mini mansion. And I'm not saying that people that have a lot of money shouldn't live where they want to live, but we should not also allow them to destroy our communities.
Definitely. Thank you.
Displaced people. Thank you so much, Kylie. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I just wanted
Hi.
to thank you both again for your time today. My name is Lyric Amodia. I am a junior political science major, Afro Studies minor from Arizona by way of Flint, Michigan, and Germany.
Wow.
Yeah. And my question today for you is, so one of my goals is to be a homeowner 2 years by the time I graduate. So what programs or first steps do you recommend for Black students to gain homeownership?
The first thing I would say to you is go to HUD.gov/counseling. They lay out for you in very clear terms the things you need to think about in terms of purchasing a home, even down to what your credit score should be.
It's equity, and that's important. Yes, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? My name is Elizabeth Balarinwa. I'm a junior clinical laboratory science major from South Jersey by way of Nigeria. And I was just wondering what the department does to regulate zoning of hospitals, because I care a lot about health equity, and if there's anything that we can do to advocate for hospital zoning.
We don't zone hospitals, but what we do sometimes is help fund them. So we do have a program that finances hospitals and things like nursing facilities, assisted care facilities, but we don't determine where they go or how they are built. So I don't even know where to give you that answer. I would say probably the first place to go is to look on the website for Health and Human Services, which is, I would guess, would be the agency that would most direct it. But we'll have somebody. I've got all my staff, raise your hand right here. Any of them, give them your number, somebody will call you. I promise you.
Thank you.
And I just want to acknowledge that in addition to your staff, we have several members of your staff are graduates of Howard University. So can you at least raise your hand or stand up, Megan? And yes, good.
And Freedom.
And Frida, absolutely. And my former colleague from the Democratic Party is here, my good friend Patrice Till and Mr. Carson, Ronald Carson. So you have a good team around you.
Is that Dyson sit there?
Yeah, well, I was going to mention that we also have someone who is an educator, a preacher, a teacher, an author, an activist. I can go on and on, but we have the Reverend Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. I would be remiss. I believe he was at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And Brother Dyson, it's good to see you here during Black History Month. Give our best to Marcia, your lovely partner, wife, and thank you for all your great leadership. What was your Black History Month message to the Department of Housing and Urban Development? I'm gonna get the students should hear this. If you don't know this important figure, literary author, but an educator and just a brilliant, one of the most brilliant political scholars in the country today.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Brazile and Secretary Fudge. It was my great honor to serve as a keynote during the Black History Month celebration at HUD to celebrate their extraordinary history, the legacy that Secretary Fudge carries forth, and you can see by her brilliant comments. I mean, it takes a vast store of knowledge to be able to distill that kind of clarity for people to consume. And so I tried far less successfully than her tonight to articulate some of the themes that are central to Black life. Robert C. Weaver as the first, housing secretary, the most qualified, and he was appointed. And then those in succession, Patricia Roberts Harris, and now, of course, the second Black woman, Secretary Fudge. But the extraordinary work because it's housing and urban development. When we look at the suburbs, the way in which there's been a shift from manufacturing to service industries, the depletion of inner city resources, they've all gone out to the suburbs, the information network, the infrastructure for transportation. So I wanted to speak a bit about the centrality of Black urban existence and what that meant. And I reminded by what the Secretary said today, zip codes determine life outcomes and circumstances. And they're really more like zap codes, because you get zapped if you're in certain kinds of communities that are systemically depleted. So it was just my honor to share a little bit of that knowledge and spit a few bars for the people back at the crib.
Well, thank you, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, for your great leadership. And I know you left a lot of wisdom at HUD. Madam, I had just a couple more questions, if you can give us a little bit more of your time. In June of last year, HUD proposed restoring the discriminatory effect rule and that's the disparate impact rule. What is the rule, and why is it so significant?
It's especially significant because the argument was made that I didn't intend to do something wrong. What we're saying is that if the impact is disparate to people who are in classes that have been underserved, I don't care what your intention was.
Right, right.
The effect was to discriminate, and that is why it's important.
That's so important that you are leading this important agency. When the president goes before the American people in a couple of days, he's going to give the State of the Union, his first State of the Union address. What are you expecting him to say about housing, and what is he going to challenge us to do better in the coming year with regard to housing and urban development?
What I'm hopeful he will say is that we have taken on an agency that has a questionable recent history of equity and say that now every single American has an opportunity to buy a home. I'm hopeful that what he will say is that we have taken a look at public housing that is more than 50 years old in this country, and we're going to do something about it to fix it. I said to you earlier, and we talked about it, that of 20 years or so ago, HUD made up 7% of the entire federal discretionary budget. Today it is 1%. We have disinvested in housing. We have not built any housing really on a large scale in 50 years. It is time for us to invest in housing again. And I'm hopeful that those are the things that he will say.
HUD recently released the annual homelessness assessment, and I wanted to ask you again about homelessness. You mentioned 585,000 people. Many of them reside in the state of California. But what more can be done? I mean, everyone is concerned. I mean, for me, when I go home to Louisiana, even when I'm here in Washington, D.C., to drive past, I call it the Claiborne Avenue Bridge, even here in Washington, D.C., it's downtown. How can we get more people back into a place that they could call home?
The first thing is, and I think probably we both alluded to it, people have to be seen. We have to see them, and we have to care. I did the point in time count here in D.C. with the mayor. I talked to a gentleman, and he basically said to me, not in these words, I just need you to see my humanity. Everybody in life has problems. Some people have the ability, the access, the opportunity to deal with them, and others don't. But he wanted me to see that he was a human being that should be looked at like I look at everybody else I serve. But the only way that we address it, quite frankly, Donna, is we have to start to get people out of shelters, out of congregate care, and start to build housing that people can afford to live in. But we can't just give them the house. We should give them the house first, but we've got to do the wraparound services. We must do the kind of services, whether it be job training, whether it be health care. I mean, there was a woman who, her feet were bleeding so badly because all she did was walk all day, Donna. There's no place for her to stay or sleep or lay. She walked all day. So we have to do the health care. We have to do the education, the training, the mental health care. We have to look at people and realize where we find them and address the whole person.
Right. You know, as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, I believe under your leadership, the Black Caucus put forth so many initiatives on education and housing, healthcare. But you also, as part of your leadership in the Congress, you served as the chair of the election committee. And many of the students also, they're worried about voting rights and the future of voting rights in this country. And I know that you're no longer a member of Congress, but you also must know about the setback that we've recently experienced with voting rights. And today, if you're a resident in the state of Texas, early voting has started. And some people are getting their ballots rejected because they're not writing the form of ID that will be accepted.
There is an all-out assault on voting in this country. From the fact that the types of identification they're requesting are much less held in communities of color. So you've got, people say, well, you have to have an ID to, I don't know, to go to the store or whatever, to get a video or whatever they say. But that's not a right. Voting is a right.
That's right.
And so you can't make those silly little comparisons they want us to believe. But when I was the chair of the subcommittee, I traveled to 10 cities, did hearings in each city to determine what was happening in those communities. And we actually issued a report that talked about how far we have regressed as it relates to voting. It is a major problem in this country. It is something that I believe that we must address before the general election of this year. Because if we do not, and we find ourselves in a place where even those who want to vote, and I mean, it's bad enough that we have people who don't want to vote.
Right.
I've never been able to understand that. If you won't fight for yourself, who will you fight for?
Right.
That's what voting does.
Right.
But if you choose not to do it, of course, it's your right. But for those who want to, we want to make it easy for them to do it. Every other nation in the world is making voting easier. We're making it more difficult. And so it is something that none of us should ever sleep on. We have to address it in some way.
How important is the Supreme Court today, given the fact that we've seen a retrenchment on voting rights? We're about to, religious freedom is another big issue. Reproductive rights is another big issue. How important, and why should students even know about the Supreme Court?
Well, it's just some of the things you said. They're about to roll back Roe v. Wade. They've already rolled back, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the preclearance. They have made decisions that I think are so horrible. Now, as a lawyer, I respect the law.
Yes.
What they are doing is not even the law. It is ideology. So it is important because it is the highest court in the land. It is the final arbiter of legal matters. So you should not have people on that court who don't understand their role, which is the interpretation of the Constitution, not an interpretation of what they want to see. But more importantly, when you are at the last stop, you want to be sure that the person that you are going to meet there is going to be fair. And that's what it's all about. It's about fundamental fairness. It's about recognizing all people the same.
Right.
That's all we want.
Yeah. My final question is, it's more a personal reflection of your leadership and what you've done in your life. And I know how hard you work, not just for your own constituents back at home, but now how hard you're working for all of the American people. And so to the students here who aspire to be Marcia Fudge, we got some aspiring lawyers in the room, some aspiring business people, some political science folks. They're not aspiring to be a political pundit like me, a campaign manager. They're aspiring to be a secretary of a major department, or a lawyer, or prosecutor, finance director, chair of an education committee. What steps should they take now to begin that road or that journey?
Let me just first say you're doing some of it now just by being here. I'm a kid who learned most of what I know from books. We didn't travel. We didn't have that kind of money. So I was the kid that went to the library. I'm the kid that got out of a neighborhood most kids don't get out of. But what I knew always was that education was the great equalizer. And so I would suggest that you prepare yourself. Take the time and do the work. I'm a workaholic today. I probably was a workaholic when I was your age. But the one thing I knew is that opportunities would come. I just needed to be ready for them when they did. And I would say to you, opportunities will come. Be ready for them. Prepare yourself. Do what it takes to succeed. And the last thing I would say is associate with people who have the same kind of goals that you have. Because people who are going nowhere want to take you with them. Remember.
Can you say it again? I have to write that down. You said people who are going nowhere
want to take you with them.
Huh. That's a good one. Somebody gonna have to tweak that so I can retweet it and put it on Facebook and get an Instagram posting on it.
You know you're a mess.
Well, you know, we can go on and on and on and on, but I just got to, I would be remiss. You get a chance to see the vice president, a proud graduate here of Howard University. We think about her. We pray for her each and every day. Tell us, when you see her in that office, when you go and visit her at the White House and you get a chance, I've seen pictures of the two of you together, sitting down, talking. What is that like? Because, I mean, for me, I thought about this as a kid. I'm like, we're going to get a black president. We'll get a black female. We're going to do all of this. But we're actually living in the moment that our parents and grandparents and ancestors knew would happen if we kept fighting. Now you're actually in the room. What is that like?
First, it's delightful because I very much like her and I consider her a friend. But the thing that I think about most when I go into her office, and I ask myself, why are more people not fighting for who she is? Yeah. Why do we not stand up for those people who have done everything we've asked them to do? They've gotten good educations. They've worked hard. They've treated people decent. They've aspired and attained a goal that most of us could only dream of. Why are we not fighting harder for who she is? You know, I hear so many different things, but let me just say to you, she's brilliant. She's strong. I do believe she's being held to a standard that no other vice president has been held to, but we should not buy into it. We should be proud of those who come out of our communities, just like we're going to be proud of you, no matter what you do, as long as you're doing something good. We should be proud of her. We should lift her up, and we should let people know that she really is a brilliant, brilliant woman.
Very brilliant.
And so I feel so good. I mean, and I know her. And I mean, I could call her by her first name, but I normally call her Madam Vice President. I want to give her her propers because she's earned it.
And let her know when you see her again that the students of Howard University, the faculty, we all are praying for her, and we are with her 100%. Because we know that a graduate of Howard University, someone who walks across this campus, this feels like heaven. What heaven feels like when you know you've walked with people who have really paved the way for all of us. So I want to thank you for coming this evening, and unfortunately we have run out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially Madam Secretary Marcia Fudge. Let me also thank the team here at WHUT TV and our students here, and those of you who chose to view us online because you didn't want to come out in the cold. Once again, I want to thank Gwendolyn and Colbert King for their leadership in creating this endowed chair, and we're immensely proud and thankful you were able to participate in today's important conversation to help shine a light once again on Black excellence, especially when that excellence stems from Howard University. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.